What's the most heartless thing you've seen someone do? When my 4-year-old daughter Sophia came back from the daycare, her underwear was on backwards, and when she sat on the potty, she cried out, "Mommy, I don't want to sit down, it hurts." Her entire down there was littered with patches that looked like a rug burn. Sophia came home injured today and she mentioned Mr. Victor, I said to the daycare owner when I called her, but she cut me off. Victor is our most experienced aide. If your culture has some sort of bias against male aides, then I recommend you work through it. Beep. She hung up. The next morning, I watched Victor like a hawk. He only approached certain kids. Diego, Isabella, Lucia, all Hispanic. I pulled Maria aside before drop-off. Her son Diego had started wetting the bed again after 2 years of being dry. "And there's a cologne smell," she said quietly. "Diego's hair always smells like it." That's when I learned about the others. Isabella's mom found her trying to put 2 pairs of underwear on. Lucia stopped eating lunch, said it made her too sleepy for choosing time. I went to the director with 5 other mothers. She looked at us with contempt. "If you're unhappy with our care, you're free to leave. Though I should mention, making any public false accusations could affect your legal status in this country." The ICE threat. 3 mothers walked out immediately. Maria and I stayed, but we'd soon regret it. Victor became friendlier after that meeting, always asking about Sophia's favorite toys with too much interest. That Friday, Sophia's beloved stuffed bunny went missing. I found it on Monday morning in Victor's car when I parked next to him. "She must have dropped it," he said when I confronted him. As soon as he left, I called CPS, not even caring about my immigration status anymore. "How long has this been going on?" the woman asked, and when I said 2 weeks, she actually laughed. "Children have accidents. Toys get misplaced. Without evidence of abuse, there's nothing to investigate." Meanwhile, at the police station, the officer didn't even write anything down. A teacher helping kids in the bathroom isn't a crime. Maybe focus on potty training at home, Lucy. He already knew my name. "Your daycare called. Said you might come in with accusations." 2 weeks passed with no follow-up as I watched as my once bubbly child deteriorated in front of me. She regressed completely, panicking if I tried to leave her alone in any room. 2 weeks later, the director called me in for a meeting. When I arrived, Victor was there too. "Sophia has been extremely difficult," the director said. "Victor has graciously offered to provide one-on-one support during quiet time." I said absolutely not. The director smiled. "It's not optional. Either Sophia receives the support she needs, or we'll have to terminate her enrollment. And I'll have to report to the state that you refused recommended interventions." I couldn't lose daycare. My job barely covered rent, and I'd already used all my sick days. My mom was in Mexico. Every babysitter wanted more than I made in a day. Friday morning, Sophia gripped the car door. "Please, Mommy. Today is assessment day. They're going to take our pictures for the special families." I didn't understand what she meant, but I had 17 minutes to get to work. When I dropped her off, Victor was standing at the door. He took Sophia's hand and smiled at me. "Don't worry. I'll take special care of her today." Something about how he said special made me turn around and follow them inside. Victor was taking Sophia down the hallway marked "Staff Only." I could hear her crying and his voice saying, "Remember what we practiced." I kept going and heard Sophia's voice from behind a door marked "Storage." She was saying, "I did it right? I was quiet like you showed me." Victor responded, "Good girl. Now stand against the wall." I grabbed the handle. Locked. I could hear a camera clicking inside. I kicked the door even harder. Crack. The lock broke. Sophia was standing against a white wall in just her underwear. Victor had a camera. 2 other children, Diego and Isabella, sat on the floor with tears streaming down their faces. Victor stepped between me and the door. "You're trespassing. I'm calling the police." He was too calm, like he'd done this before. Sophia was clinging to me, whispering, "I'm sorry, Mommy. I tried to be good, I promise." Victor grabbed my phone. "You stupid woman. The director's brother is ICE. Her sister approves daycare licenses. 1 call and you'll be deported while Sophia goes to a nice American family who can actually provide for her." I grabbed Sophia and held her tight against me while reaching for Diego and Isabella with my other arm. Victor was still holding my phone, but I pushed past him hard, my shoulder hitting his chest as I moved toward the door. The kids were crying and clinging to me as we stumbled into the hallway. Victor followed us shouting about how I was trespassing and he'd have me arrested, but I kept moving. My legs felt weak, but I had to get these babies out. Other staff members started poking their heads out of classrooms to see what the noise was about. Victor kept yelling that I was crazy and kidnapping the children, but he couldn't actually grab us with everyone watching now. I scooped up Diego in one arm while holding Sophia's hand and telling Isabella to hold onto my shirt. We rushed through the main daycare area where other parents were starting to arrive for pickup. Victor was on his phone now, probably calling the director, but I didn't care. I pushed through the front door and into the parking lot where I saw Maria's car just pulling in. I ran to her window and banged on it with my free hand. She took one look at our faces and Diego's tears and immediately got out of the car. I told her in fast Spanish about the storage room and the camera and the kids in their underwear. Her face went white and she grabbed Diego from my arms. She called Isabella's mom from her phone while I held Sophia, who was shaking. Maria said we needed to go to the hospital right now for evidence before anyone could make this disappear. She put Diego in her car seat while I got Sophia and Isabella into my car. We drove to the emergency room with Maria following right behind me. At the hospital, I carried Sophia while Maria brought Diego and Isabella. The triage nurse saw the kids crying and asked what happened. I told her I found them being photographed without clothes at daycare. She stood up immediately and called for another nurse. They took us to a private room right away. The nurse separated us into different exam rooms and started asking Sophia gentle questions while I held her hand. She took photos of the red marks on Sophia's bottom that were still there from before. The nurse told me she had to file reports with CPS and the police by law. She said this would create official records that couldn't be ignored. Maria texted me that the director was calling her phone over and over. She showed me the voicemails where the director was screaming about us kidnapping the children and threatening legal action. The director said we had 5 minutes to bring the kids back, or she'd call the police for kidnapping. I went to the hospital gift shop and bought a cheap prepaid phone for $20. I started texting the other moms from our group about what happened. Within an hour, 7 mothers were responding with their own stories. One said her daughter had nightmares about picture day. Another said her son kept hiding when he heard cameras. They all wanted to know what to do next. The nurse came back with paperwork and said the doctor would see Sophia soon. She said they'd found similar marks on Diego and Isabella. The police would be here within the hour to take our statements. I knew this meant I'd miss work tomorrow, but I didn't care anymore. That night, Sophia wouldn't let go of me even to go to the bathroom. She kept saying sorry over and over even though I told her she did nothing wrong. I slept on her bedroom floor because she screamed when I tried to leave. The next morning, I kept her home even though my boss would be mad. I looked at my bank account and figured I could last maybe 2 weeks without pay. After that, I didn't know, but Sophia mattered more than money. I called Maria and asked if she'd come with me to get our stuff from the daycare. We drove there together, leaving the kids with Isabella's mom. The director was standing at the front door with her arms crossed. She handed me my phone with this nasty smile and said Victor had turned it in. She said I was banned from the property after my stunt yesterday. I told her I just wanted Sophia's things from her cubby. She went inside and came back with a garbage bag of Sophia's stuff thrown together. I asked for a receipt showing she gave me everything. She wrote one on a sticky note and basically threw it at me. Maria got Diego's things the same way. The director said we'd be hearing from her lawyer about the kidnapping and defamation. She said her brother was already preparing paperwork for our deportation. She said Sophia would be better off with a real American family anyway. I wanted to hit her, but Maria pulled me back to the car. We sat in the parking lot for a minute, just breathing. Maria said she was scared, but we did the right thing. I looked at Sophia's stuff in the bag and saw her lunchbox was missing. I knew the director kept it on purpose, but I wasn't going back in there. We drove to Maria's apartment and made a plan for the next steps while the kids played together. That afternoon, I drove home with Sophia while she clutched her bunny and kept asking if we were going back to the school tomorrow. I told her no, and she relaxed against her car seat for the first time in weeks. At home, I grabbed a notebook and started writing down everything while Sophia watched cartoons in the living room. I wrote the exact time I found them in that storage room, what Victor said word for word about deportation and ICE, how Diego and Isabella were sitting on the floor crying. I wrote about the white wall, the camera in his hands, Sophia in just her underwear. My hand was shaking, but I kept writing, filling page after page with dates and times and every detail I could remember. I took pictures of each page with my phone and emailed them to myself, then to Maria, then created a brand new Gmail account just for storing all this evidence where nobody could delete it. Sophia came to show me a picture she drew, and I saw her backpack by the door. I opened it to get her lunchbox, and that's when the smell hit me. Her spare clothes that the daycare always made us pack smelled like men's cologne. That same strong smell Maria had mentioned about Diego's hair. I held the little shirt up and the smell was so strong it made me dizzy. I grabbed my phone and took pictures of the clothes from every angle, then found some big Ziploc bags in the kitchen and sealed each piece of clothing separately. I wrote the date and time on each bag with a Sharpie and put them in a box in my closet. My hands were still shaking when I remembered the church bulletin from last month that mentioned an immigrant resource center. I found the number and called even though it was getting late. The woman who answered said they had a legal advocate named Jimena Leon, who specialized in cases where people use immigration status as a weapon. She scheduled me for 2 days later at 10 in the morning and told me to bring any documentation I had. The next morning, my phone rang while I was making Sophia breakfast, and it was my boss telling me to come to his office as soon as I got in. I dropped Sophia at Maria's and rushed to work knowing this wasn't going to be good. He had a write-up form already printed on his desk and started talking about my absences and leaving early and how the company needed reliable employees. I wanted to explain about Sophia and the daycare, but I could see in his face he didn't care about my problems. He said next absence meant termination and pushed the paper across for me to sign. I signed it and went back to my desk knowing my job was hanging by a thread now. That afternoon, while Sophia napped on the couch, my phone rang with a blocked number. The woman said she was from CPS calling about the intake for the hospital report. She sounded bored and kept sighing when I tried to explain what happened. She asked how long this had been going on, and when I said I wasn't sure, but at least a few weeks she made this noise like she didn't believe me. She said the ER report meant she had to open a case, but kept saying things like alleged and unsubstantiated. At least she gave me a case number, which was more than we had before. She said someone would contact me in 7 to 10 business days for a home visit. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived from the daycare that made my stomach drop. The director wrote that Sophia required intensive behavioral interventions due to her recent acting out and refusal to participate in activities. It said refusing these recommended services could be considered educational neglect and would be reported to the appropriate authorities. The threat was clear, even though she used fancy words to hide it. I scanned the letter immediately and emailed it to the new evidence account, then texted Maria and the other moms a picture of it. Isabella's mom called me right away and said she found something in her son's old backpack from 2 months ago. It was a crumpled flyer about assessment day for special families with a note about bringing photo release forms. We started putting pieces together and realized these assessment days happened on the last Friday of every month. Maria checked her calendar, and every one of those Fridays Diego had come home upset or had accidents later. All the dates matched up with when our kids had problems. We made a list, and it was always the same kids targeted. All Hispanic, all with parents who couldn't afford to lose childcare. 2 days later, I drove to the Immigrant Resource Center with a folder full of everything I'd collected. The building was in a strip mall between a check cashing place and a small market. Jimena Leon met me in a small office with certificates on the wall and a box of tissues on every surface. She was younger than I expected, with kind eyes, and took notes while I talked. She explained I could file for a protective order to keep Victor away from Sophia and might qualify for a U visa since we were victims of a crime and cooperating with police. She made copies of everything I brought and started organizing them into a proper file with labels and tabs. She said having the ER documentation was huge because it created an official record nobody could deny. She spent an hour teaching me about evidence and chain of custody and how to document everything properly. She showed me how to write dates and times on everything, how to store physical evidence so it couldn't be questioned later, how to avoid doing anything they could twist against me in court. She kept emphasizing that everything I did from now on could be used by them to say I was lying or exaggerating. She gave me a list of do's and don'ts and made me promise to call her before making any big decisions. She said our next step was going to police again, but this time to a different precinct where they didn't know about us yet. The next morning, Maria and I drove 20 minutes to a police station in a different district, while Isabella's mom watched our kids. The officer at the desk sent us to Detective Carl Hughes, who actually had a notepad out when we walked in. He listened to everything and asked specific questions about dates and times and who else knew about this. When we showed him the ER reports and the photos, his whole face changed. He said this was serious and he'd coordinate with the hospital for their records. He gave us his card with a case number written on it and said he'd be in touch within 48 hours. For the first time since finding Sophia in that room, I felt like someone was actually listening. Carl called me 2 days later and explained that Sophia would need something called a forensic interview at the Child Advocacy Center. He said they had special people trained to talk to kids about hard stuff without making it worse. I spent the next 3 days getting Sophia ready without scaring her more. Jimena had given me special words to use, things like body safety and private parts, instead of anything that might upset her. I practiced with Sophia using her dolls, showing her it was okay to tell grown-ups when something felt wrong. She kept asking if she was in trouble, and I kept telling her no. She was being so brave. The night before the interview, Sophia wouldn't go to bed at all. She started screaming about the photo game and begging me not to let them take her clothes off again. I held her on the couch while she thrashed and cried for 3 straight hours until she finally wore herself out. She kept saying Victor told her it was a special game only for good girls, and if she told anyone, Mommy would go away forever. I learned that bright lights made her panic now, and certain smells like that cologne would make her hide under tables. She couldn't stand having her picture taken anymore, not even on my phone. The next morning, I went outside to warm up the car and found it completely keyed up. Someone had scratched Liar into the paint on both sides and across the hood, too. My hands were shaking as I took pictures of everything with my phone. The scratches were deep, down to the metal, and would cost way more than I had to fix. I called the police and waited 40 minutes for them to show up and write a report. The officer said without cameras or witnesses, there wasn't much they could do, but I made sure to get the report number for our files. Jimena had been telling me to document everything, so I added the pictures to our evidence folder on my computer. Later that day, Jimena called and said she had someone I should meet. Julian Lockhart was a reporter who wrote about bad stuff happening to kids, and he wanted to help. We met at a coffee shop downtown where I brought copies of everything with the kids' names blocked out. Julian was younger than I expected, with glasses and a notebook full of questions. He said he'd been tracking similar stories at other daycares, and this fit a pattern. He promised to protect our identities while he dug into the connections between the daycare and the licensing people. Within 2 days, Julian had found another mom whose kid went to our daycare last year. She hadn't joined our group because she'd moved away, but her son had the same problems we were seeing. Julian started filing paperwork to get records about who owned the daycare, and if there were complaints before. He said the sister connection to licensing explained why nothing ever happened when parents complained. The forensic interview finally happened a week after Carl set it up. I sat in a different room watching on a screen while a nice lady talked to Sophia with toys and drawings. Sophia told her about the special room and the pictures and how Victor said she was his favorite. The lady was patient and calm, even when Sophia got upset and hid under the table. She found what she called concerning signs, but said it wasn't clear enough for them to do anything right away. I wanted to scream because Sophia had told them what happened, but apparently that wasn't enough. Jimena met me after and reminded me this was going to take time, that we had to keep going even when it felt hopeless. She said every piece of evidence mattered even if it didn't feel like enough yet. We found Emmeline Driscoll through the advocacy center and started therapy the next week. Emmeline had a quiet voice and toys everywhere in her office. She taught Sophia new words for her body parts and helped her understand that nobody should touch her private areas. She gave me homework too, teaching me how to respond when Sophia had flashbacks without making them worse. We practiced breathing exercises, and Sophia learned to say, "My body belongs to me," over and over. Emmeline explained that Sophia might act younger for a while or have accidents, and that was normal after trauma. 3 days after therapy started, an email showed up from a lawyer representing the daycare. They demanded we stop spreading what they called false accusations, or they'd sue us for defamation. The email was full of legal words meant to scare us into shutting up. Jimena read it carefully and wrote back without backing down, but also without giving them anything to use against us. She said we had a right to report suspected abuse and work with law enforcement. Carl had been working on something big while we dealt with the lawyer threats. He went to a judge with everything we'd collected and asked for an emergency protective order. The judge looked at the evidence, especially the ER reports and the pattern of targeting the same kids. She granted a temporary order that said Victor couldn't come within 500 feet of Sophia or any of the other kids we'd identified. It was our first real win, and I cried when Carl called to tell me. That same night, Maria called me crying because someone from a blocked number had called her. The voice said if she didn't drop everything and stop talking to police, they'd call ICE and have her deported tomorrow. Maria was smart, though, and had recorded the whole call on her other phone. We saved the audio file and sent it to Jimena right away, as proof they were threatening witnesses. Julian called me 2 days later with news that made everything click into place. He'd been digging through public records all week and found something big. The woman who approved the daycare's license every year was named Erica Hernandez, same last name as the director. More digging showed they were sisters, which explained why every complaint parents filed just disappeared. Julian had copies of 5 different complaints from the past 3 years that all got marked resolved without any actual investigation. He was putting together all the documents to show this pattern, and said he'd have enough for a story soon. Jimena took this information and ran with it the next morning. She drove to the state capitol herself to file complaints directly with the Attorney General's office, bypassing the local people completely. She also sent copies to the Federal Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, since they were targeting Hispanic families specifically. The woman at the Attorney General's office actually listened and opened a case file right there. While Jimena was doing that, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message had a photo attached showing the storage room door from inside the daycare. The keypad lock was clearly visible, and the photo showed a piece of paper taped next to it with the code written down. The text said only senior staff knew this code, and Victor shouldn't have had access unless the director gave it to him. I forwarded it to Carl and Jimena immediately. Maria called a meeting that night at her apartment with all the mothers. We had a problem since none of us could afford to quit our jobs, but we couldn't send our kids back to that place either. Isabella's mom suggested we take turns watching each other's kids, like a rotation where each mom took 1 day off work. We spent 3 hours making a schedule on Maria's kitchen table, figuring out who could miss which days. It wasn't perfect, but we made it work for 1 week at least. Monday morning, I dropped Sophia at Maria's place and went to work. My boss called me into his office before I could even clock in. He said I'd been missing too much work and was cutting my hours from 40 to 20 a week starting immediately. I tried to explain, but he just handed me a new schedule and walked away. 20 hours meant my paycheck would barely cover rent, nothing left for food or gas. I went to the welfare office on my lunch break to apply for emergency food stamps and cash assistance. The worker said it would take 2 to 4 weeks to process, and even then it might not be much help. Carl kept pushing for a search warrant, but the judge wasn't convinced yet. He interviewed each family again, taking detailed notes about dates and times and patterns. He made charts showing how Victor always picked the same kids during quiet time between 1 and 3. He documented the cologne smell 3 different mothers noticed. The judge said it was interesting but wanted more concrete evidence before signing a warrant. 3 days later, Maria found something weird posted on the daycare's website. They'd put up new forms saying all parents had given permission for their children to be photographed for promotional purposes. The forms were dated 6 months ago, but we'd never seen them before. I took screenshots of everything and printed copies too. They were obviously trying to cover their tracks after we caught Victor with the camera. Emmeline had been seeing Sophia twice a week and wrote up her professional assessment for our case. She documented all the signs of trauma she observed, the regression in toilet training, the new fears Sophia developed, the way she'd panic if anyone tried to change her clothes. Reading the report made me cry because seeing it all written down by a professional made it real in a way I'd been trying to avoid. The report was 8 pages long with clinical terms I didn't understand, but the conclusion was clear that Sophia showed signs consistent with abuse. Julian's first article came out in the local paper that Thursday. He didn't name our daycare specifically, but wrote about problems with oversight in childcare licensing across the state. He had statistics about how many complaints got dismissed without investigation and how often family members of daycare owners worked in licensing offices. The article got shared online hundreds of times, and other parents started commenting with their own stories. People were angry and demanding the state do something about it. That afternoon, I got a call from a woman named Jennifer, whose daughter went to our daycare last year. She'd seen Julian's article and wanted to talk, but was scared because she wasn't an immigrant and didn't want to get involved in something political. I gave her Carl's number and she agreed to call him. Later that day, 2 more parents reached out through our Facebook group. They were both white families who'd noticed strange things but hadn't connected the dots until now. One mom said her daughter started having nightmares about picture day, and the other said her son would hide whenever someone mentioned quiet time at the daycare. They didn't want to go public because they were worried about their reputations in the community, but agreed to talk to Carl privately. Having non-immigrant families involved changed things because now nobody could say we were making it up, or that it was just a cultural misunderstanding. Carl said it strengthened our case significantly, and the judge might actually approve the warrant now. That same night, around 11, Maria texted me a photo from a number I didn't recognize, and when I opened it, my hands started shaking because it showed a keypad lock on the storage room door with a timestamp from 3 months ago. The message said it was from someone who worked at the daycare but couldn't give their name, and the photo proved Victor's access wasn't some accident, but something they'd planned for months. I saved everything to 3 different places and sent copies to Carl and Jimena right away, then stayed up making notes about what this meant for our case. The next morning, I drove to City Hall with all our documents and met with 2 council staff members who kept looking at each other when I explained how the director's sister approved daycare licenses. They took notes and asked for copies of everything and said they'd flag it for committee review, but I could tell from their faces they were worried about liability. That weekend, all 6 mothers met at Maria's apartment, and we spent 8 hours going through our calendars and photos to build a timeline showing exactly when each child was alone with Victor. We used a big poster board and colored markers to track patterns, and it became clear he always picked the same kids during quiet time between 1 and 3 when other staff took breaks. Isabella's mom had kept every pickup receipt showing the exact times, and Diego's grandma had a notebook where she'd written weird things he said after daycare. We photographed everything and made copies for each family plus extras for our lawyers, and by Sunday night we had proof of 23 separate incidents. Monday morning, a certified letter arrived saying I was banned from daycare property for disruptive behavior and making false accusations that damaged their reputation. Maria got one too, and so did 3 other mothers, and we immediately scanned them and added them to our retaliation file. Jimena called an emergency meeting at her office and explained she was filing for civil protective orders for all our families with the hearing set for next Thursday. She spent 2 hours coaching us on how to answer questions without getting emotional and what clothes to wear and how to sit and speak clearly. She made us practice saying just the facts without crying, even though talking about what happened to our kids made everyone break down. We packaged all our complaints with Jimena's help and drove them to the state capitol to deliver to licensing authorities outside the director's sister's district. The woman at the desk looked surprised when we explained why we couldn't file locally, and she gave us a receipt saying they'd opened an independent review. 2 days later, Julian texted saying to meet him at the daycare at 3 because something was happening, and when I got there, the director was standing in the doorway blocking parents from getting their kids' stuff. Julian was filming everything on his phone as she yelled at parents that they were trespassing and she'd call the police if they didn't leave immediately. One dad was just trying to get his daughter's inhaler from her cubby and the director physically pushed him back while Julian captured it all. Parents were crying and kids inside were scared and confused and the whole scene was chaos. But Julian got 20 minutes of footage showing how she threatened and intimidated families. That night my phone rang and it was my landlord saying the daycare director had called him claiming I was involved in criminal activity and he might have to start eviction proceedings. I drove to his office the next morning with the protective order and all the newspaper articles and begged him to understand what was really happening. He looked uncomfortable but said he'd wait to see what happened with the case, though. He warned me any more complaints would be a problem. Thursday morning, Sophia woke up from her nap without crying for the first time in over a month and actually smiled when I came to get her. Emmeline had been working with her twice a week and said these small improvements meant the therapy was helping her brain process the trauma safely. She still wet the bed and wouldn't let me leave the room, but not crying during nap time felt like a huge victory, even though we had so far to go. Carl called that afternoon saying he had news, and when I got to his office, he showed me a stack of medical records from 5 different emergency room visits. The injuries documented across all the kids showed the same patterns and locations, and the timing matched our timeline perfectly. He said the district attorney's office was taking it seriously now, and would probably file charges within 2 weeks if the investigation supported what the medical evidence showed. I wanted to cry from relief, but knew we still had the protective order hearing coming up, and so much could still go wrong. The daycare was still operating, and Victor was still free, and other kids were still at risk every single day while we waited for the system to work. Carl said to be patient and trust the process, but patience was hard when I knew what was happening behind those doors. Maria showed up at my door that night with red eyes and a suitcase half-packed, telling me she was done and thinking about taking Diego back to her mom's place in Guadalajara. We sat at my kitchen table going through all the options while Sophia slept, and Diego played with blocks in the corner. Maria kept saying she couldn't handle the stress anymore. But when we looked at plane tickets and what it would mean to leave everything behind, we both knew running would just mean starting over with nothing. She unpacked the suitcase, and we decided to stick together because two families fighting had better chances than either of us alone. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from Julian saying someone just sent him something big. And when I opened the attachment, it was screenshots of internal daycare emails talking about portfolio materials for special families, with dates matching when our kids were taken to that storage room. The emails never said exactly what the portfolios were, but the coded language was obvious. And one message mentioned Victor's collection growing and needing better quality for premium clients. Julian said his source was scared, but wanted this exposed and promised more documents were coming if we could protect their identity. I forwarded everything to Jimena, who called me in immediately for prep work before the protective order hearing scheduled for next week. She sat me down in her office and made me practice answering questions over and over without getting emotional or going off topic. She'd ask me something, and if I started crying or getting angry, she'd stop me and make me start again until I could say just the facts calmly. She warned me the other side would try to make me look crazy or like a bad mom, and I needed to stay composed no matter what they said. We practiced for 3 hours straight, and by the end, I could talk about finding Sophia in that room without my voice shaking. The morning of the hearing, I wore the outfit Jimena picked and sat exactly how she showed me with my hands folded and back straight. The judge looked through our stack of evidence, including the hospital reports and the emails Julian got, and the photos of Sophia's injuries. Victor's lawyer kept objecting, but the judge told him to be quiet and kept reading. After 40 minutes of reviewing everything, the judge granted a 1-year protective order saying Victor couldn't come within 500 feet of Sophia, Diego, Isabella, or any of the other kids named in our complaint. Victor sat there with his jaw tight but didn't say anything while his lawyer whispered in his ear. 2 mornings later, Carl called me at 5:30 saying to turn on the news because something was happening at the daycare. The footage showed police cars and a forensics van outside while Carl and his team carried out computers and boxes of files. The director was on the sidewalk screaming about harassment and threatening to sue everyone while parents who showed up for drop-off stood around confused about what was happening. Carl's team spent 6 hours going through every room and loading evidence into vans, while the director called her lawyer and yelled at anyone who would listen. They found 3 cameras, 5 computers, and boxes of USB drives that Carl said would take weeks to analyze properly. That afternoon, Victor got picked up at his apartment for questioning, and they took his phone, laptop, and a desktop computer from his bedroom. The news said he was questioned in connection with an ongoing investigation, but he posted bail 2 days later and was back on the streets, though at least now he was officially under criminal investigation. The next morning, the state licensing board posted a notice on the daycare door saying the license was suspended immediately pending investigation, and no children could be cared for at the facility. Parents were scrambling to figure out what to do, and our group chat exploded with people asking if anyone knew babysitters or had spots at other daycares. Some parents were angry at us for causing this mess, but most were grateful someone finally did something about that place. Julian's article came out that afternoon with the daycare named and all the connections laid out, including how the director's sister approved licenses and her brother worked for ICE. The story spread through parent Facebook groups and Twitter, and by evening, 3 local news stations were running segments about it. People who never knew about the daycare were suddenly paying attention, and other parents started coming forward with their own stories about weird things they'd noticed. The director tried to do damage control with a statement calling everything lies, but Julian had receipts for everything and kept posting more evidence online. Within a week, the story had been picked up nationally, and the daycare's name was trending with people sharing their own experiences with sketchy childcare places. Jimena filed my U visa paperwork the day after the article came out, with Carl signing the law enforcement certification saying I was helping with a criminal investigation. The paperwork would protect me from deportation while everything played out, and Jimena said it was the fastest she'd ever gotten one approved because Carl pushed it through as priority. Emmeline started coming to our apartment twice a week to work with Sophia and teach me how to help her feel safe again. We set up new bedtime routines with special songs and a nightlight that changed colors, and Sophia got to pick 3 stuffed animals to guard her while she slept. Emmeline showed me how to play games that helped Sophia's brain process what happened without making her relive it, and we practiced breathing exercises for when she got scared. The therapy was slow, but after 2 weeks, Sophia started sleeping past 3 in the morning without waking up screaming, and she even smiled when I showed her a funny video on my phone. My old boss called that same afternoon to tell me not to come back since I'd missed too many days, and I knew we needed money fast. The community center had a bulletin board with job postings, and I found one for night cleaning at an office building downtown that started at 11 p.m. and went until 7 a.m., which meant I could be with Sophia all day. The pay was $12 an hour instead of the $17 I'd been making, but at least it was something, and they hired me on the spot when I showed up with my documents. That first night, I left Sophia with Maria, who agreed to keep her overnight, and I took 3 buses to get to the office building where the supervisor handed me a cart full of cleaning supplies and showed me which floors to clean. My feet hurt by 3 a.m. and my back was killing me from emptying trash cans and mopping, but I kept thinking about Sophia needing me during the day, and that kept me going. The next morning, Maria called to say there was a meeting at the community center for all the affected families to figure out childcare since the daycare was closed and nobody had backup plans. 15 families showed up, including some I didn't know had problems with Victor, and we sat in a circle while one of the moms who spoke better English wrote everything on a big whiteboard. We worked out a schedule where different parents would watch groups of kids on different days, based on who had flexible work, and Maria's cousin, who ran a home daycare, agreed to take 5 kids at a reduced rate. Isabella's mom offered to watch kids on Tuesdays and Thursdays, since she worked from home, and another family had a grandmother who could help on Mondays. We exchanged phone numbers and created a group text to coordinate pickups and drop-offs, and for the first time since this started, I felt like we weren't alone in this mess. Carl called the next day while I was making Sophia lunch and said the forensics team found encrypted folders on Victor's devices that needed special software to crack open. He explained it could take weeks to decrypt everything, but what they'd already found showed Victor had been doing this for a while, with file dates going back 2 years. There were folders labeled with initials that matched some of our kids' names, and Carl said this was enough to support multiple felony charges once they got everything decoded. He warned us to be patient since building a solid case took time, but promised they were working on it every day and would update us as soon as they knew more. Jimena brought a civil attorney named Erica to our next meeting who explained we could sue the daycare and its owners for damages, even while the criminal case was happening. She passed around engagement letters that laid out how she'd work on contingency taking 30% of any settlement or judgment, and we'd be seeking compensation for therapy costs, lost wages, and emotional distress. Erica said the daycare had liability insurance that would probably try to settle quickly to avoid bad publicity, and she'd already sent preservation letters demanding they keep all records and surveillance footage. We all signed the papers hoping to get something back for everything we'd lost, even though money couldn't fix what happened to our kids. 2 days later, Jimena texted that the director's sister who approved daycare licenses officially stepped down from the case after the news coverage made it impossible to pretend there wasn't a conflict of interest. The state assigned an independent reviewer from a different district to take over the investigation, and this person had no connection to the director's family, which meant we might actually get a fair review. The new reviewer immediately ordered a full audit of every daycare the sister had approved in the last 5 years, and other parents started coming forward with complaints that had been ignored. My landlord knocked on my door that weekend, and I thought he was going to evict us, but instead he said the council member's office called him to explain what was happening. He agreed to waive the late fee for this month and said he'd work with me on a payment plan if I needed more time, which was a small relief, but helped me avoid falling further behind. He even offered to write a letter supporting my housing stability for any legal proceedings, which showed that some people actually cared about what we were going through. Maria found a small preschool run by a church near the community center that had 2 openings, and the director there agreed to take Sophia after hearing our story. I spent 3 days shadowing Sophia at the new place, sitting in the corner while she played and making sure she felt safe with the new teachers who were all older women who'd been there for years. The first day, Sophia wouldn't leave my side, but by the 3rd day, she was playing with blocks near 2 other girls, and even smiled when one of the teachers brought out finger paints. The preschool had cameras in every room that parents could check on an app, and they never closed doors during any activities, which made me feel better about leaving her there. Even better, Maria got hired part-time in the preschool's kitchen after mentioning she had restaurant experience and needed flexible hours. This meant one of us was always in the building during the day, and we worked out a system where she'd check on the kids during her breaks, and I'd drop by between my cleaning shifts. The teachers understood why we were being so careful, and never made us feel bad about staying close or asking lots of questions about their procedures. At the protective order hearing, the judge reviewed all the new evidence, including the forensics findings, and extended our order for a full year, despite Victor's lawyer arguing it was excessive. The judge said protecting children were the court's primary concern, and Victor would need to stay 500 feet away from any of our kids, their schools, and our homes. Victor sat there in his suit looking angry while his lawyer kept objecting, but the judge shut him down every time and warned that any violation would result in immediate arrest. Finally, Carl called with the news we'd been waiting for as the district attorney's office officially filed charges against Victor for unlawful recording of minors and multiple counts of child endangerment. It wasn't everything we'd hoped for since proving the worst charges would take more time, but Carl said these charges meant Victor would have to register as an offender if convicted, and would never be allowed to work with children again. The next week, I signed up for a support group at the community center where 6 other mothers were dealing with similar cases, and we started meeting every Tuesday to share resources and legal contacts. Sophia's therapy sessions moved to twice a week, and Emmeline taught me specific games to play at home that would help rebuild her sense of safety without triggering her memories. I created a binder with copies of every document, every police report, every medical record, and started helping Maria organize hers the same way since the lawyers always needed everything in triplicate. The preschool let me volunteer in the afternoons sorting supplies, which meant I could watch Sophia through the window while she finger painted with the other kids. 3 weeks later, another mother called me after finding my number through the community center and I walked her through exactly who to call at the hospital, which detective to ask for, how to preserve evidence. Sophia started sleeping through the night again without waking up screaming, though she still needed her new nightlight shaped like a butterfly. I typed up our entire timeline on the old laptop the church donated and posted it anonymously on a parents' forum with step-by-step instructions for documenting abuse. That Saturday afternoon, Sophia sat on the living room floor, making her dolls have a tea party, while I answered emails from parents asking questions about protective orders and which lawyers would work with payment plans. She looked up and said, "Mommy, the dolls are happy today," before going back to pouring pretend tea. And for the first time in months, she was playing without constantly checking where I was. Thanks for hanging in there with me through all the questioning and wondering. Really enjoyed exploring these moments right alongside you all. Subscribe for more content like this.